The cabin lights flickered as turbulence rattled the plane. Oxygen masks dangled, passengers screamed, and panic surged through the narrow aisles. Flight attendants rushed to restore order, but fear was spreading like wildfire. Then, in the middle of the chaos, one passenger calmly rolled up his sleeve, revealing a tattoo that made the entire crew freeze in shock. In that instant, everything changed. The flight attendant's breath caught in her throat. She knew that symbol. It wasn't just ink. It was a mark carried by only a handful of people in the world. Her eyes darted from the tattoo to the man's face, searching for confirmation. He gave a small, deliberate nod. Her panic melted into something calmer, steadier. She leaned closer and whispered, just enough for him to hear. You served." The man didn't answer with words. He simply tapped the tattoo with 2 fingers, then lowered his sleeve slightly, as though he'd revealed just enough. But the silent gesture spoke volumes. It wasn't the kind of tattoo anyone would get for style. This was earned, paid for in sweat, discipline, and sacrifice. The attendant's posture shifted instantly. Her frantic energy vanished, replaced with professional composure. She stood straighter, and when she turned back to the other passengers, her voice carried more authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay seated. Everything is under control." The shift was subtle but noticeable. People listened. Maybe it was her tone, maybe it was the way her eyes no longer reflected panic, but her presence had changed. Meanwhile, 2 more crew members approached, drawn by her sudden calmness. They, too, caught a glimpse of the tattoo as the man adjusted his sleeve. Recognition spread. One of them muttered under their breath, "No way," before quickly snapping back into duty. What the other passengers didn't know, but what the crew understood, was that this tattoo belonged to an elite unit, one known for handling crises far worse than turbulence at 30,000 feet. It was a mark of survival, of training in situations where fear kills quicker than bullets. The man finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "Control the breathing. People follow your energy. Keep them focused." It wasn't a command, not exactly. More like advice delivered with the kind of weight that comes from experience. The attendants nodded instinctively, as if following orders they didn't know they'd been waiting for. As the plane jolted again, the man rose slightly in his seat, not standing, but steadying himself enough to be visible to those around him. He raised his hands slightly, palms down, signaling calm, a universal gesture. "Everyone breathe. You're okay. Look around you, oxygen is flowing, the plane is steady. You're safe." His voice carried in a way that cut through the chaos. It wasn't loud, but it was commanding. Passengers near him began to mirror his calm breathing, clutching their masks less tightly. The ripple effect spread, row by row. Even the child who had been crying earlier grew quieter, watching the strange calm settle in. The crew, reinvigorated by his presence, worked with renewed focus. Their frantic movements had transformed into deliberate, controlled actions. The man's tattoo had done more than reveal his identity. It had restored authority in a place where fear had stripped it away. But no one yet knew exactly who he was, or why that tattoo carried so much weight. And for now, he wasn't offering any answers. The storm outside still tossed the aircraft from side to side. But inside, something remarkable had happened. What had been raw chaos only moments earlier was now eerily calm. Passengers who had been sobbing just minutes ago were breathing steadily, their eyes fixed either on the crew or on the mysterious man with the tattoo. The flight attendants moved with a new confidence. They were no longer just service staff caught in a terrifying emergency. They were professionals, guided by the unspoken authority of someone who clearly understood crisis. Every time they glanced at the man, it was as if they were reassured. "We can handle this." One of the attendants whispered to the other, "He's special forces. Has to be. No civilian carries that mark." The man didn't deny it. He simply adjusted his mask, eyes scanning the cabin with the sharpness of someone trained never to miss details. He watched the passengers, noting who was still in distress, who might bolt for the aisles again, and who was calming down. It was as if he was running silent triage, not medically but emotionally. Another drop jolted the plane, eliciting a fresh wave of gasps. But this time, the panic didn't spiral. Instead, people glanced at him, and when they saw he hadn't flinched, they steadied themselves. His calm had become theirs. Minutes stretched on like hours. Finally, the captain's voice returned, clearer this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered unexpected turbulence and a temporary systems issue, but everything is under control. Please remain seated, and we'll keep you updated." The cabin exhaled collectively. For the first time since the chaos began, there was a fragile but real sense of hope. The man lowered his sleeve, covering the tattoo once more. To him, it wasn't about recognition or admiration. It was simply about doing what he had always been trained to do. Step in when fear takes over and steady the people around him. As the turbulence began to ease and the plane steadied on its course, whispers rippled through the cabin. Passengers leaned toward each other, some asking, "Did you see his arm?" while others speculated wildly about who he might be. But for the crew, there was no question. They knew enough. That tattoo wasn't decoration. It was a badge of survival, earned through battles that most people could never imagine. And in that moment, high above the clouds, it had been the difference between hysteria and hope. The child who had been crying earlier now slept soundly, her small head resting against her mother's shoulder. A businessman who had shouted in anger earlier now sat quietly, hands folded. The ripple effect of calm had spread to every corner of the cabin. The crisis had not ended because of luck, or even because of the pilot's announcement. It ended because one man, with a single silent gesture, reminded everyone that courage is contagious. At 30,000 feet, fear had almost broken them, but the tattoo had brought them back.